Welcome to the video recording of the Outlaw Radio Show. Today's going to be a little bit different. Creighton is not with me, but I am joined by our producer, the CEO, the El Presidente of his productions, Josh Brown. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Zach, it's been a while. I'm surprised that you invited me to come back, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, you've always said you have a face for radio,
yes.
So we're gonna test out that theory for sure.
Yeah.
So what we're doing here is we're recording of the Outlaw Radio Show.
Yeah.
And Josh, if you could just kind of tell the audience just a little bit. So I send you four audio files, and then what do you do kind of behind the scenes to make a radio show?
Yeah, so we take each of those blocks as, Zach, that's what we call them. We take those blocks and we master those in audio format. So we're gonna do some EQ work, some limiting, sometimes some noise reduction, depending on the recording. And then I listen through each of those blocks, and the biggest things that I'm listening for are clicks and pops, like mouth noises like that. I'm listening for what I just did, which was or I'm listening for if you go on one train of thought and then you go another direction. So I'll edit through those pieces to try to keep them the same length, so that they work not only for podcasts but also for radio. And now that you're doing video for YouTube, I know you're just syncing everything as it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you have been a fantastic partner, and we're just going to dive right in. You're going to be actually a guest on the Outlaw Radio Show. We've called these in the past, and we'll keep the branding.
Yeah.
But a 751-mile conversation, because I think you have some interesting insights on not just kind of the coronavirus, but where we're going as a church, like what life will look like afterwards.
Yeah.
And so without any further ado, we'll kind of, right now is when the music will be dropping, and then Josh's first block is 14 minutes. And so 14 minutes, we're going to do the show, and we're going to let people kind of watch us do it. So you ready for it?
Let's do it, man.
All right. 3, 2... Welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. My name is Zach Adams, and I pastor a church located just outside of Athens, Georgia. The name of the church is Calvary 316. Our Sunday service stream is at 10:30 Sunday mornings. Again, would love to invite you to come and visit our church in person, but due to certain guidelines, we are not meeting in person. So check us out. Our service stream, again, 10:30 on Sunday mornings, and then Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, we do a Sunday replay. So be our digital guest and check out the church. Again, more information on the church, calvary316.tv.org.net.com. Regardless of where you're listening or how you're listening, whether you're listening through one of our amazing radio partners or you're listening to the Outlaw Radio episode as it's podcasted. Every episode is podcasted. Quick links for the podcast you can find at outlawradio.org. But wherever you're listening or however you're listening, I do hope you stay with me over the next hour as we seek to do what we always do, and that's deconstruct the negative perception that the world has of Christians by boldly having relevant topics. And again, there's nothing more relevant as far as our world right now than this coronavirus and some of the things that are happening with the social distancing orders, the mandates, the shelter-in-place guidelines, some of these things being eased, some of the restrictions being lifted, and life beginning to move back to a point of normalcy. And so today's episode, I want to talk about normalcy. I want to talk about what the world looks like after this, and specifically what the church and technology looks like. And so to have a really, I think, fun conversation about that, I've invited Josh Brown, our producer, his productions, to be on the show. So Josh, thanks for being back here on the Outlaw Radio Show.
Zach, thanks for having me back. It's always a joy to join you on Outlaw Radio. It's my heart is with you in this ministry, and to see what God has done over the years has been amazing. It's just been so cool to see God use you in your teaching ministry across the country and I guess all over the world now with podcasts.
Absolutely. So can you tell the audience right now just what our partnership looks like what you actually edit and produce for Outlaw Radio?
Yeah, so every week we publish or produce and publish, I should say, the Outlaw Radio Show as it broadcasts on radio stations all over the United States. And if you're listening right now, you are tuned into one of those radio stations.
Which is fantastic, and thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you to the radio stations. Zach, as you know, you've said this a number of times, and I could not agree more. It's a thankless job many times, and these brothers and sisters are working around the clock to bring this kind of content to you. So hats off to all the station managers, program directors,
Amen,
and people that are serving in radio. It's more important now than ever. But every week, Zach, as you and sometimes Creighton are together recording this broadcast, you send me the 4 parts, the 4 blocks, and 2 blocks comprise a half, right? So we have part 1, or the first half, and then the second half of the Outlaw Radio Show that airs on these radio stations. It's 52 minutes in total length. And so that's what we do is master the audio, do the editing, and then do all the assembly with the voiceover and music, and kind of mix all that down to create those 2 parts to be delivered to the radio stations.
Now, aside from that, and a lot of people that maybe listen to the show aren't aware, but that's not the only editing that you guys do for us. We do have the Outlaw Radio Show, that 52-minute medium, but you guys have just totally blessed us by also producing kind of the sermon content. Can you kind of explain a little bit about that and how that works?
Yeah. So at His Productions, we do this not only for you, Zach, but a lot of pastors. We take your Bible teaching ministry that you share with the congregation at your church on a Sunday morning, or, well, I know in your case, not necessarily a midweek Bible study, but on a Sunday morning. And if you teach, let's say 45 minutes, maybe an hour, we will cut that into 2 to 3 teaching ministry style radio broadcasts. So people, on their commute to the soccer mom taking her kids to soccer, or the dad commuting to work, or whatever, they're able to listen to solid Bible teaching like yours, as if they're sitting in a pew like you are, like your congregants are at your church. So this is a discipleship tool. It's a way to build up the body of Christ. And guys like you who are teaching the word line upon line, it really is an amazing ministry. I know for me, Zach, early on in my walk in the early 2000s, when I was at Calvary Chapel Bible College, listening to men of God teaching the word over the radio was a big part of my growth as a follower of Jesus. I remember listening to Pastor Chuck, and I remember listening to Skip Heitzig and Mike McIntosh and John Corson. There's tons of other guys that I really respect. But you are a part, Zach, of discipling a lot of people. God's using that Bible teaching to do that.
I want to pivot ever so slightly. So you had mentioned kind of these radio stations, and we've been blessed we're on the air all across America.
Yeah.
Can you peel back a little bit? So when we say a radio station, the typical audience member, they have no context for what that looks like,
right?
Who would run that, if it's profitable, what it costs. We mentioned it's a labor of love. These people are not doing it to make money. I say that a lot, but these people personally across America just by what you do. Can you, tactfully, but peel back the veil a little bit, just so the people know that if they are listening on the radio, that big sacrifices are being made. Like, a lot of work goes into making that happen.
Yeah, from some stations that are smaller, that are called LPFM, or low power frequency radio stations. These many times, Zach, as you know, and listener, you're about to hear, these are run by a single person. A lot of times it may be even the pastor himself who is
right.
Yeah, he owns and operates a small powered radio station that reaches 10, 15, maybe 20 miles in all directions, depending on the topography in his area. And LPFMs are a great way that particularly Calvary chapels have proliferated under the vision of Chuck Smith. Radio has been a big part of why Calvaries have been just really successful. Then you have full power radio stations. And again, these a lot of times are owned by Calvary Chapel churches. And then they may have a station manager, maybe. They might have a program director. And then, Zach, like in your case, you're on some radio networks. And these are conglomerates. That's probably a financial term, doesn't really apply. But they're groups of full power radio stations and translators that cover multiple states, multiple metro areas. For you, Zach, the team at Hope FM, led by Pastor Bill.
Wonderful
Lukeman.
people. I mean, really wonderful people.
Yeah, and I call Bill often. He's one of the two rocket scientists of radio. it's a term that we've given him. He's brilliant. Him and his team are brilliant. The way that Bill operates that station on Hope FM, and the other people that help him with that, it's just astounding. And Bill's station, Hope FM, covers. It's not a station. Forgive me. It's a network of stations.
A conglomerate.
Yeah. I think Bill might actually like that term, but it's a bunch of radio stations that cover tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, really, and in some cases, actually millions of potential listeners. So the radio stations, they make money by selling what we call underwriting spots. Because most of the radio stations, Zach, all the stations that you're on, and most of the stations in Calvary Chapel and in Christian radio as a whole are what the FCC called non-com radio stations. So they cannot sell advertisement. They sell underwriting, which is very specific in how they word it and how those spots are created. It's much more about partnership, about local businesses partnering to support radio than putting an ad on a radio station. So that's one way that they receive funding. Another is through churches like Calvary 316 and other churches who either donate towards the time that they're purchasing on that station, or they do have a time slot cost. The bigger networks definitely do. So you're going to pay more at drive time than you are at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning. So those are the two big ways. And of course, listener, if you're listening right now, it comes by donation. It comes from good people like you who love the ministry, the radio station that you're listening to right now, and God prompts you, no manipulation, no arm twisting, and you just choose to send a check in the mail or jump online and give a donation online. That's how these radio stations see their bills paid.
And again, we're not being asked to do a plug for any of the radio stations. If you're listening to a radio station right now, we have not been asked by them to do any type of fundraising. No. But we love these people. Yeah. We see Outlaw Radio, his productions. We're partners in the ministry with these various radio stations. They vet what we're saying. We vet what they stand for. So it really is a partnership. But what we're saying is that if you enjoy this type of programming on your local Christian radio station, just realize that your donation, your gift does go a long way. These people are not out to make money. They're not making money. A lot of them are their finances are being offset by a church. That's being very generous to take care of the needs. And they view it as a mission. It's a mission to reach their community with the gospel. Well, I didn't want to turn this into a plug for radio. I want to talk about coronavirus, this pandemic, and I think it would be important. Josh, I've been speaking about this for weeks now. Yeah. Can you give the audience a little bit of a glimpse into your experience with this, kind of how it started, and just kind of the maturation over the last few weeks, just in your own life?
Yeah, so I was actually coming back from NRB in Nashville, which is National Religious Broadcasters. Say again.
Oh. Yeah, I was going to say, tell people what the acrostic stands for.
Yeah, it's National Religious Broadcasters. It's the largest conference in the country for TV, radio people. And I was driving back. I took a friend of mine from church with me down to this conference, and we're driving back. We're talking about this Chinese virus. And he was really concerned about it. And I said, man, this is just the flu. This is no big deal. This is going to pass. More people die every year of the flu than whatever this thing is. And this would have been the last week, I believe, in February. If my memory
that would fit the timing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so I didn't really think anything of it. And then the next week we were in Tucson at Robert Furrow's church for the South West Calvary Chapel Pastors Conference. Things were starting to heat up. We saw some people in the airport. My wife and I, Lisa and I, saw people in full garb, and we were just poking fun. Like, what are these people doing? I mean, it looked like they had space suits on, hazmat suits on, and we weren't worried at all. We were washing our hands, but Zach, I travel a ton for work, as you know. I wash my hands every single solitary time I get off a plane. And I'm very mindful about touching my face because planes are dirty, period, whether there's coronavirus or not.
Right.
So I've always had those sort of hygienic practices when I traveled anyways. But yeah, that first week in March was the last trip I took. And things slowly unraveled nationally and even locally where I'm at, as you well know.
Now, you live in the state of Indiana. What kind of restrictions do they have for you guys right now?
Yeah, Indiana's under a stay-at-home order, and we're encouraged to wear masks and to not be out, not leave the house. Some people are working. State parks in my county were closed up until today because, unfortunately, we do have a segment of our population that just was not quarantining, and that's the Amish community. A lot of Amish in northern Indiana, and they were not quarantining, so the state decided to close the parks because they're actually all congregating at these parks.
Wow, okay.
But as of today, the parks are reopened, our state parks, so we can go outdoors and walk around. But yeah, Indiana is really pretty chill. All the restaurants are closed, bars are closed, school is closed, but you can still get carry out at a restaurant. You can still go to the larger stores.
Well, we're running against a break. Josh is going to stay with me. We're going to kind of continue this conversation and really get into the nitty-gritty of where we're going from here. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. So we're just going to pick right up where we left off. That work for you?
Yeah, what's the timing on this one? I didn't time that well.
No, 12 minutes.
Okay, tell me when.
Yeah, so we'll just go right into it. You ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. We're talking about life after coronavirus. In last week's episode, I made the comment that what's interesting about a crisis is that a crisis doesn't necessarily foster new trends within society. But what a crisis does is it speeds up, it accelerates trends that already were in existence. One of the things that I mentioned last week was just digital giving. Over the 20 or so years, we've seen this progression within church culture, church life, of people moving away from writing a check, dropping it in the offering box, to using online forms of giving, whether it's PayPal or Square or a certain service. People are beginning to use those things. But now with the coronavirus, it's just accelerated that trend because you can't get to the offering box. I am joined by my brother, also the producer of this show, Josh Brown, who's 751 miles away. Josh, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Let me ask, do you own a mask? Have you worn a mask yet?
Okay, I do have a mask, but as you can see, those of you watching this, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not watching it on or listening to it on the radio, I have kind of a gourd head. And so the mask that the woman made for me, made my ears kind of almost fold in half. So man, I tried that thing one time and I was like, I'm not going to wear this. So,
no one has mentioned this, but it should be pointed out that Michael Jackson has been a trendsetter. He pioneered a lot of fads and trends within music.
The king of pop.
But he was way ahead of his time with the whole surgical mask.
Yeah, he was.
I mean, he was decades in advance. I mean, this would be Michael Jackson's heyday. Not only would he be allowed to quarantine, which is sketchy, but he would be they'd be cool with him wearing a mask.
Yeah.
I've not worn a mask. I don't own a mask.
Yeah.
One of the things that was pretty neat is my mom was stir crazy, so she started making masks. Yeah. And people on Facebook could just reach out and say, "Hey, I'd like a mask," and she'd mail you one.
That's
and
awesome.
It kind of became, she did hundreds of masks.
Yeah.
But I have a mask my mom gave me, but I'm not going to wear it. Weird. It's just weird. Where are you guys at? I know you're super involved with your church.
Yeah.
How have you guys been adapting recently? I assume you guys are doing a video. You're not meeting in person.
Right.
Explain a little bit about where you're at presently, because we're going to talk about where we're going in a minute.
Yeah, just to kind of pick up where we left off and before the break, I live in northern Indiana, but the church that I am a worship pastor at is in very, very southern Michigan. So we're like 10 minutes away from the northern border of Indiana and the southern border of Michigan. And so Michigan, as many of you know, in the news is considerably different. Like there's a very, very suggested mandatory mask order under executive order that sounds like you could be fined, but maybe you couldn't. So
I'm going to be honest. People in Cuba have more freedom than the residents of Michigan. That lady's crazy person.
It's crazy, man.
Your governor's nuts.
Well, not my governor. I live in Indiana.
That's right. Your church's governor.
I tell my friends and the people I serve with, I was like, this might cross a line here. We'll go ahead and say
move to Indiana.
Move to Indiana because blue politics always cost you more money.
Right.
They just
and
do.
Take away your freedom.
Yeah, generally they do, man. So, our church, Zach, like a lot of churches, it's surprisingly, we're a pretty large church for our area. We were not live streaming at all. 3 days before the lockdown, we quickly scrambled. We have an IT guy here at our church that's super brainy and capable. Bennett, if you happen to watch or listen to this podcast, I love you, man. You do a great job. So Bennett and some of the tech guys here helped. After that first live stream, we quickly pivoted. We had a very generous person in our church help us get some of the equipment that we needed. And since then, we did another live stream. And Zach, after that, we started pre-recording. I'm actually, for those of you that are watching, I'm sitting at my church right now recording this podcast, this vlog style thing that we're doing. In our little makeshift studio section of the worship center. So we are live recording everything, worship, the teaching, and then we send that out for post-production. Actually, the team at His Productions does that post-production for our church. And then we premiere it on Facebook and on YouTube on Sunday mornings. And then we also use the church online platform. So that's kind of how we've pivoted.
You have not asked me to do this, but I do want to throw out a little plug.
Okay.
His Productions is known primarily for radio and audio work, but one of the things that even before coronavirus, you guys were pivoting into kind of diversifying into TV and video work, video production. And I just want to throw out a little bit of a plug. If you're a pastor watching this and you're struggling to just kind of adapt to these things with video, reach out to Josh, reach out to His Productions, whether they can help you, actually you hire them, or Josh would give you some advice. We're all in this together, and Josh is a treasure trove of information, just figuring out how to do it. So little shout out to His Productions and what you guys do. So you are pre-recording your service, and then you stream it on Sunday morning?
Yeah, so Friday evenings I generally get the final proof and I'll watch that, and then Saturday morning I come to my recording studio, His Production studio. We've got pretty fast internet there, and so I will upload it there Saturday to be premiered at 9:50 a.m. So the video is essentially in the Facebook and YouTube hopper, and then because of the premiere feature, it's a scheduling feature. It just sends that out live at that time. So it holds it until the time you've scheduled to premiere the episode.
So it just posts the video. It doesn't actually stream it.
Yes, it posts the video, but it feels live in the sense that it's being aired live. So like our entire pastoral staff, they're very sitting by with their computers engaging people.
We're using a different platform, but at Calvary 316, we almost followed the same trajectory that you did. First couple weeks, we did live. We actually did live up through Easter, and then it was like, man, we can do this so much better if we record in advance and produce it. And then we're using, and I'll give them a shout out, OneStream. OneStream.live is, I stumbled across them, and man, their platform is smooth, it's slick, and it does the exact same thing that you're referring to, that it just, on multiple platforms all at once. And so I can sit there, what's neat is on Sunday morning, and be interacting with people. Just that other component to pastoral ministry, not just so much teaching, but just interacting, checking in, seeing how you're doing. Where do you think the trends are going as far as like when we do get back? Well, let's even back it up one step. How do we get back to normal?
From the very beginning, Zach, you and I have had a lot of conversations in text and over the phone talking about COVID-19. I generally am a glass half empty kind of person when it comes to these things.
Right.
I
Yeah.
definitely lean more towards conspiracy in the way that I think about things. So I'm going to go with what the president said. It's not normal. It never will be normal again. There's a new normal that is slowly being defined. But how do we get back? And where is back? Let's define that first. Do you mean?
Let's define that. That's a great question. Where are we at in 6 months? Like when we're back to a normal, what does normal look like?
Yeah. So, and I hate to make a lot of predictions, but I just talked with a pastor, and I won't say where, that I serve. It is a Calvary Chapel church, actually. And they were headed into a webinar just after I was going to be talking with them to purchase thermal scanners for their church. This is a very, very large church, thousands upon thousands of people. Thermal scanners. So imagine you drop your children off at kids ministry at the church, and they pass this thermal scanner, like a metal detector style system that detects whether that child has a fever, which could be infection that could be spread, because fever is one of the number one ways that we understand contagion. And I'm not a doctor. Please understand me, and I'll speak for Zach right now. No one here on Outlaw Radio is a doctor. I'm not the producer.
No.
Zach's not. We're pastors.
The closest we have is probably Creighton, and that says a lot.
Uh-oh. Yeah. So imagine
scanners.
Thermal
Wow.
scanners. And Zach, I think if we get outside of the church sector, you're going to see some of those things in large metro areas. You're going to see those things in stadiums. And I think that you'll continue to see in 6 months social distancing in those large areas, churches included. So let's take my church, for example. We're of a church close to 1,000 people over 3 worship services. I'm in Michigan too, by the way. When do you think Whitmer, who is our governor, and the state of Michigan, and the psychology, which we could talk about this for a long time, Zach, when do you actually think that 400 people are going to want to sit shoulder to shoulder in a worship center, and when will the government allow that?
I think that those are two entirely different questions. Because what the government will allow, that becomes a constitutional issue.
Right.
And you can't, First Amendment, you have not only do we have the freedom of religion, we also have the freedom of assembly. Yeah. And the government can't tell us in any way how we meet, how we worship, or what the parameters are for that, which is why I think churches by and large have been playing a really slippery game. In the way that we've handled this. We're coming against a break, and we're going to continue this conversation when we get back. But this is a good moment for me to just pass along some of our contact information. We want to hear from you, the listening audience. You can reach us, email info@outlawradio.org. We're on facebook.com/theradiooutlaw. Our Twitter handle, radio_outlaw. And if you'd like to watch this, the video of the recording, check out outlawradio.live. It's a quick link to our YouTube channel. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. All right, bro.
Cool. What's this one?
11 minutes.
Cool.
11 minutes. All right. You ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. We're talking about what life looks like after this pandemic. And admittedly, no one really knows.
Right.
I don't claim to be a prophet. By the way, if you heard right, Josh Brown, his productions, Josh is with us. Josh, say hello to the audience in case they're joining us here at the halfway mark.
Yeah, glad to be here for the second half of the show.
So what life looks like, no one really knows. I'm not a prophet. I'm a pastor. But just trying to extrapolate things out. Mm-hmm. Let's be real. I think a lot of this is going to end up being regional.
Yes.
Different states, different areas. I think urban societies will be dealing with this. Urban churches will be dealing with this much differently than rural churches. Calvary 316, we pull from Atlanta, we pull from Athens, but we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so the county that we're in, I think we've only had like 40 or 50 deaths, and it's totality. We've had more people probably die from drunk driving or falling off their tractor than than COVID-19. And don't quote me on any of those stats. It's a joke. But so there's a lot of unknowns. I guess going broad, do you think, because, okay, you framed your own church, you're 1,000 people, 3 services.
Yeah.
How does that even begin to function?
And that's a really challenging question. So the way that church functioned before this, I can tell you this: most churches, what they would say is, the front door of your church is the front door of your church, and digital ideas and concepts of ministry are kind of a secondary or ancillary way of reaching people and ministering to people. So an addition, an add-on, right? Our church, the philosophy has completely pivoted to what probably should have been quite some time ago. Digital is the front door. Digital is the front door. So, what does that look like in terms of what we're doing now? We're having Zoom meetings every night of the week. Our small groups are meeting sometimes more than once a day. Zoom small groups where groups are getting together. I'm a worship arts pastor, so my worship team meets Thursday nights on Zoom, and we're in the middle of a book discussion. We're reading a book together, chapter by chapter, and we're talking through some ways that we can grow. So Facebook Live, our church is doing this thing called At 8. So twice a day at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. on Facebook, one of our pastors goes live, or sometimes it's pre-recorded, it depends. And they just share a 5 to 7 minute devotional and then a follow-up devotional in the evening. So kind of first half, second half, kind of like the Outlaw Radio Show is. So we're trying to jump into the deep end of the pool of reaching people on the other side of the screens that we're all looking at right now. And that could be Facebook, that could be YouTube, podcasting, 100%. Church, if you're listening right now on the radio or you're watching this on YouTube and your church doesn't have a podcast, you need to have a podcast, okay? You need to have a YouTube channel. So what we're doing right now, what Zach is doing right now on this YouTube channel, and it doesn't have to be crazy for those watching, those listening. I'm holding up an iPhone. This is an iPhone 10. This is the last model iPhone. This camera on this iPhone puts out 4K, 24 frames per second video. It's unbelievable what it will do. So you probably have all the tools that you need in your hands. Now, it can get a lot more complex from there if you really want to. But those are some of the things, Zach, that we're doing. We're trying to do everything that we can. We're doing worship nights. We're doing times of prayer. We're doing all of our staff meetings, of course, this way. So it's all online. And I know that sounds ridiculous because everybody's online, but those are the ways that we're doing it.
Do you think there is so church is so much more than the services that a group of people provide, a larger group of people. Like,
yeah.
Church, it's more than a Bible study. It's more than the worship. It's more than those type of services that are provided. Church ultimately is a community of people. Now, I think creatively you guys are doing some things to try to foster the continuance of community through digital platforms, and I think that's cool. But at some point, human-to-human physiological contact,
yep,
you can't replace that.
No.
And if we end up in a place where that's what the church is what it is, we're being dictated by governmental forces what we can and can't do, robbing, the tangible gathering together, the breaking of the bread, the sharing of the cup,
yes,
recognizing, certain things that we're to do in remembrance of him when we're together. Like there is a togetherness that a digital platform can never replicate.
Right.
Ever replicate.
How do you baptize someone online?
Right. How do you, exactly. Great example.
Yeah.
How do you baptize people online? One of the things that blew my mind just tying this in is how, so the Catholic Church, of which I'm not Catholic, you're not Catholic, Roman Catholic. Neither of us, I mean, we're Protestants for a reason. Right. We're protesting certain things.
Yes.
One of those things being transubstantiation.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that what's unique about the communion elements is that we're adhering to what Jesus said in John chapter 6. We're actually partaking of the literal body and blood of Christ. And thus, that sacrament is essential for one's salvation, which is then, because it's literally the body and the blood of Christ, a priest has to administer it. You can't just do it on your own.
Can't waste it.
But with this social distancing thing, how in the world how in the world is the Roman Catholic Church even helping people stay safe because they can't administer communion remotely? I mean, we have we've allowed the government to step in and say what we can and can't do. Let me give you a totally different angle. I think if I opened Calvary 316 tomorrow, like this coming Sunday, if we open, and I said, no restrictions whatsoever. We're not adhering to social distancing. We're not keeping 6 feet apart. You can wear a mask if you want, but like, to heck with it all. We're going for it, and you just come at your own risk.
Right.
We'd probably be packed.
Yeah.
I really think
you would be completely packed.
Which tells you something. I mean, are we trying to create a solution to a problem that at worst doesn't really exist, at maybe the more moderate position is an issue that's very difficult to mitigate, or at worst we're all going to get coronavirus anyway, so why are we even playing this game? Which I'm more and more leaning towards. They just did an antibody test in New York City, and 25% of people had the antibodies.
Which means they have already contracted COVID-19 and recovered. That's what that means.
Without even knowing it.
Right.
Like, how many people have it, are asymptomatic? Again, are we as a church trying to come up with a solution to something that at best we can't solve, and at worst we're making a bigger issue out of something? And again, I'm not trying to play coy with something that's serious. You and I talked a lot about this.
Yeah.
When this stuff was happening, I was one of the first people talking to you, was like, hey, is your church going to be open this Sunday? And you're like, as of right now, yes. And I'm like, no, it won't be by the time we get there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an alarmist, but I feel like we're getting to a point where, as great as the digital platform is, and as well as it's helped us for a period of time, I worry that it might end up being a crutch to keep us from what we're supposed to be. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. And I think the other thing we kind of talked a little bit briefly earlier about this. I think the other big elephant in the room is the sociological changes, or the psychological changes of our congregants. Okay. So I think you're right, Zach. You're going to have handfuls of people who would fill your church this Sunday completely. I think in other areas, you might have the exact opposite. A church that used to be 500, you have people who are deadly afraid of this virus. They don't buy into the herd immunity idea. Hook, line, and sinker believe this is end of the world, apocalyptic plague, and they're not going to come back to church. So how do you manage those two camps as a church and in church leadership?
Well, listen, that's a much broader question. I've never created social policies within our church,
right,
with the weakest among us as the predominant factor,
right.
And there's all types of topics that would be applicable to that we can't get into,
right.
But the idea of restricting everything within a church down to your least common denominator, or like that wing nut.
Yep.
No thanks.
Sure.
We'll let the preppers find their own church. In an underground bunker. By all means, go for it. I'm just saying, like, societally. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing even right now some major, like in Michigan, which is where your church is.
Yeah.
They've been on the front lawn of the Capitol, not keeping social distancing, saying this is crazy.
Yeah.
And what we're doing as a society is kind of crazy. Yeah. And I'm just saying, as a church, I think we should be wise. But when you're at the point where you've got churches going out and buying thermal scanners, like you've missed. Like if your church has a thermal scanner, I'm not even going anyway. We're running against a break. We're going to wrap up all these thoughts. Josh is going to stay with us. One more block. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. I would ask you who the church was, but you can't because this is being recorded as well.
No, I can't.
But that's insanity.
It's the sociology, bro. It's the psychology. That's why. The end of this for those who are afraid, and you and I have already talked about this. It's a vaccine or global testing, and I think there's a mark. I think that there's going to be. Imagine if you could go into the grocery right now, Zach, and you could, at a glance, by a mark on a person's forehead, know that they have either the antibodies or they've been tested. You could hug that person, you could shake their hand. It was as if nothing had ever happened if you had that mark, a visible way to know who was who. That's what I think this is about.
You want to go that direction here?
Bro, that's up to you. I mean, the spiritual side of it is Jesus prophesied. Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation, the Bible.
Let's go there. Let's go there. Hold it. We'll just dive right in. Okay. This was not the direction I was planning on today's episode, but you went there. So we're going to do that because I think that this could be very helpful. So, okay. You ready? How
long is this one?
9:45.
Okay.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. Off air, Josh and I were talking a little bit about this segment, and he brought up something that was very interesting to me. And so we're going to kind of pivot really hard. We're talking about things within the church, things that will change moving forward, maybe larger congregation sizes, thermal scanners. If you're sick, we're going to verify that before we let you in. Spreading out pews. I think there's a lot of problems with a lot of this stuff, a lot of inconsistencies. Again, I talked about it in the previous episode. If you go from the 80% rule to a 60% rule, you can't fill your congregation with enough people to sustain paying for that building unless you own it. So there's a lot of things as a society, as church, as Christians that we're going to have to work our way through. One of the things that has, and Josh, you mentioned this, that there's going to be kind of two groups of people within Christianity. You've got those that are ready to get back to church right now, and they're like, kind of to heck with it, we're doing this. You have, let's say 3 groups. You have a middle group that's like, hey, let's pump the brakes a little. Let's try to be wise. Let's try to be prudent. We'll get back to a normal, but let's not do this too fast, kind of the more moderate. And then you've got like this crazy extreme group of people within Christianity that see this as the beginning of the end of the world, that the ultimate result of this is the mark of the beast, that the rapture of the church is going to be happening any moment, that the Antichrist is going to come from this, that this is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Explain a little bit of how people are reaching those particular conclusions.
Yeah, so Zach, I really think if we look into the Bible and we read what the prophets say, the book of Revelation say about what's going to happen in the last days, like these are things you've taught as a pastor. Other pastors have taught about this. It's things in our Bible that we know they're going to happen. And we've always said it in that fashion. We've said they're going to happen. Well, some generation, some group of people on earth are actually going to experience what we read about in the Bible. If we believe the Bible is true, and we do, of course we do, then we believe that the things we're reading are actually going to happen. So my question is this, and imagine right now if you're listening and you're terrified. I mean, you are really afraid of this virus. Maybe you're even in a demographic that is particularly at risk. And if you are, I'm sorry. And I hope that you're healthy.
No
I hope you're healthy and safe. And I hope
and
you're
be safe.
Take precautions.
Amen.
The statistics are very plain. You need to be careful. Don't brush this off. But imagine if you happen to be in that demographic and you could go to your local Walmart right now and you know that there's only 2 ways that you can psychologically not be afraid anymore. The people that you encounter in public need to have one of 2 things. you need to know whether they have the antibodies, meaning they've had it and recovered, so they're fine. 2, you need to know, have they been vaccinated? So it's testing or vaccination. These are the 2 things that have to fix the fear. Unless we just ignore fear and we say, I'm not afraid. But for those who are afraid, you want to know who has been tested and what are the results, or has that person been vaccinated? Now, imagine you go to Walmart right now, and with a visual identification, a simple glance over in the produce section at Walmart right now, perhaps a mark on a person's forehead, visible to all, you could see this person has either contracted it and has the antibodies, or they've been vaccinated. They're safe. This is your neighbor. You could go over to this person, and because they have this mark that shows that they're COVID-free, we'll call it, you could shake their hand, hug them, do all the things that you normally would do when you encounter your neighbor at the produce section at Walmart. Imagine that. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like the radical thing that you just described. It sounds like a mark where you can neither buy nor sell. So I think that if this isn't what culminates, Zach, into a mark that governs the global economy, if this whole thing that we're experiencing isn't, it certainly is a precursor to psychologically prepare people for that mark, because we know it's coming. We know, what do we know? There's 3 things about the end times we know. Dates and times, we're not even going to go there, but we know there's going to be one world government, right? We know that. We know there's going to be a one world religion. The Bible's clear. We know that there's going to be a global economy. We know those are the 3 things that we should be paying attention to in the seasons that Jesus identifies. So that's what I believe. If this isn't what's actually taking place, a preparation for a real mark that dissuades and deals with all the fears that culture is. I mean, there are people screaming. I was at TSC in my town. It's called Tractor Supply, right? This is a place where you go to get dog food or whatever, pliers. It's a farm store. People screaming at each other out front of the store because one person got closer than 6 feet to the other person, screaming at one another, right?
That's insanity.
It is insanity, but it's real. If you really believe that there's this death to all plague kind of sickness going out there, how else would you act, right? For those of us that aren't acting that way, what does it tell us deeply inside? Because faith, what we believe, yields actions. So, and that's true in Christianity. It's true in everyday life. What we believe yields action. So for those of us who aren't freaking out like that at the local Walmart, it's because we really don't believe that it's as contagious and serious as they are telling us. For those that believe it, their faith in what they're being told is yielding action like that and fear at such huge amounts. So I'm not saying this is the mark of the beast. I'm not going to even go there, but I believe it could be a precursor. I really do.
Let me jump in, because so I absolutely understand what you're saying and how that's framed. I will kick back in this regard. First, one world government, man, this has done more to set that back 50 years than anything.
Yeah, that's true.
We now have nations that are, you can't travel freely around Europe for the first time since World War II.
That's right.
I mean, nationalism is back. We've got Canada shutting down its borders. And when you know Canada shutting down its borders, things have gotten ill.
Right.
So, whereas, okay, we see this the precursor to a mark, how that might theoretically work. The one thing, though, that I will absolutely agree with you, and this is what we should take away, is how quickly the government was able to use fear of a pandemic to strip away our constitutional liberties and rights. Like how quickly, not just were they able to strip them away, but the population at large was like, take them.
We were complicit.
Like we have been completely complicit in all of our fundamental rights, even to our own detriment.
Yes.
Like the unemployment, people are losing their jobs, mortgage delinquencies almost 2% across America. Like we've allowed the government to spend $4 trillion, twice the GDP, in a fear of a disease.
Yeah.
We have willingly, as a society, Christians alike, given away our constitutional liberties.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that we should take away is, man, that's how you'll do it. And B, maybe we should pump the brakes and say there are bigger other things that are at place. I will add one thing. We're running out of time. You mentioned faith. And for you Christians that are out there, I encourage you. The Bible says it's appointed for man to die once. Once. God knows your time. You don't have to be in fear. If it's COVID, then it's COVID. Amen. But whatever, it's your time is ordained by God and is controlled by God, and you can trust him. If you're not a believer listening to this, without Jesus, you should be freaked out because you don't know what happens when you die, and you could die. I'd love to tell you about the answer. Reach out to us at info@outlawradio.org, and we'll send you some info. Josh, we're running out of time very quickly. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Zach. As always, it's a joy.
Well, you've been listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. If you like what you heard, I encourage you to reach out to your local Christian radio station. As we talked about in the first block, it's a labor of love. They're doing this as a ministry, a step of faith. So reach out. Let them know that you're thankful they're carrying this type of programming in your community. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is to visit outlawradio.org. From the site, you can access our podcast, available on Apple Podcasting as well as Google Play. Also, check out outlawradio.live. This episode was filmed, and it gets posted Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Once again, my name is Zach Adams. I hope you join me again this time next week for the Outlaw Radio Show. There we go.
Cool.